Welcome back. I was reviewing a script this week about a man who cried at his own rehearsal dinner and watched the woman he loved turn it into a quiet form of entertainment. What struck me was not the humiliation itself, but what he built in the silence that followed. He never raised his voice. He opened a forensic file. You're watching his eternal diary.
The gardenias were her idea. Ethan noticed them the moment he walked into the Ashwick Grand's private dining room. 43 white gardenias, arranged in 5 low crystal bowls along the center of the rehearsal table, their scent so thick it sat at the back of his throat like a pill he hadn't swallowed. He had mentioned once, in the early months, that gardenias reminded him of his mother's garden in Clemson. Vivian had filed that detail away and deployed it here, tonight, in front of 60 people, as evidence of how well she knew him. He had believed it then. He still almost believed it now, standing in the doorway in his navy sport coat, watching the waitstaff in their white gloves orbit the table like satellites, watching his future mother-in-law, Constance Hargrove, adjust the placement of a name card with 2 fingers, as if correcting the posture of a child. He pressed 2 fingertips to the inside of his left wrist. The pulse there was calm. He had trained it to be. Behind him, the elevator opened, and his best friend, Marcus Webb, appeared in a charcoal blazer with no tie, looking slightly harried, phone already in hand. "Traffic on the 63 was a situation," Marcus said. "You're 4 minutes early," Ethan said. "Right, and you've been here since at least 7. So you're already running your little assessments." Marcus glanced past him into the room. "How bad is the flower smell?" "It's significant." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "You good?" "I'm fine." He said it the way he said most things. Level, short, without the micro quiver that most people layered under statements like that one. And he had spent the better part of his adult life learning to say true things in the same tone he said untrue ones, not out of deception, but because composure was the only architecture he trusted. His father had been a man who wore every emotion on the surface of his face like weather, and Ethan had watched that quality destroy him 3 separate times by the age of 18. He moved into the room. Vivian was already there, near the far window, in a dress the color of aged cream, her dark hair swept up in a low arrangement that took, he knew, 2 hours and one specific stylist named Petra, who charged $400 for the privilege. She was laughing at something her cousin Blythe had said, her chin tilted slightly upward in the way she laughed when she wanted the laugh to be noticed, when she wanted it to carry across a room and land gently on everyone present, as confirmation that the evening was going well, that she was the reason it was going well. She turned when she heard the door, and her face arranged itself into warmth. "There he is." She crossed to him in 3 elegant steps, and pressed her cheek against his, one hand at his jaw, the way she always greeted him in public. Close enough to look intimate. Not quite a kiss. "You're cold," she said quietly. "Did you walk from the parking structure?" "I did." "Ethan?" She pulled back and looked at him with the particular brand of exasperation she reserved for his practicalities. "The valet. I know." She studied him a half-second longer than the moment required. Then the warmth returned, and she took his arm and steered him toward the table, toward her mother, as toward the gathered Hargrove and Callaway contingents, arranged like 2 different species that had been introduced into the same enclosure and were still deciding whether to coexist. Ethan shook hands. He made conversation. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and held it without drinking. He was good at this, the performance of presence, the way a pianist is good at sitting at an instrument that is slightly out of tune and playing it anyway. Dinner came in 4 courses. Dover sole, then a watercress salad with candied walnuts, then a short rib that arrived in a pool of reduced stock so dark it looked like lacquered wood. Ethan ate methodically, tasting nothing. He was running calculations at a low frequency under everything. The way a machine runs background processes while presenting a clean interface to the user. Yet the toast portion of the evening was Vivian's design. She had structured it, in typical Vivian fashion, with the precision of a corporate event. Each speaker slotted into a sequence, each segment timed. Her maid of honor, Serena Price, went first, 6 minutes. Warm and polished. Anecdotes about a trip to Portugal 2 summers ago. A reference to Vivian's directness that drew knowing laughter from the Hargrove side of the table. Then Vivian's father, Edmund, stood and spoke for 9 minutes in the measured cadences of a man who had given many speeches and trusted the weight of his own name to carry them. He said something about legacy. He said something about the Calloway name being a worthy addition to the family's trajectory. Ethan noticed he did not look at him while he said it. Then it was Ethan's turn. And he had written the toast himself. He had written it 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning in his home office, a 3rd-floor room with a west-facing window that caught the last 2 hours of afternoon light, sitting at his desk with a single lamp on and the rest of the floor dark. He had written it longhand first, on yellow legal paper, then typed it, then read it aloud to the empty room 3 separate times to hear where the rhythm broke. It was not a long piece, 11 sentences, but they were specific sentences, the kind you only arrive at if you have been paying close attention to a person for 22 months, cataloging their small truths the way a scientist catalogs specimens, the way she made coffee in the dark before she was ready to speak. Was the way she kept a running list of books she intended to read but never started, because the intention itself was a form of ownership she preferred to the act of reading. The way she had called him from a parking garage at 11 at night once, not because anything was wrong, but because she had seen something funny and needed to tell someone immediately, and he was the person she had dialed without thinking. He stood. The room went to the particular quiet that rooms go to when they recognize a shift in register, when they understand that whatever is coming next will require them to pay attention. He looked at the paper in his hand. He cleared his throat once. And then, 3 lines in, something happened to his voice. It was not dramatic. There was no visible breakdown, no trembling chin, no hands that shook. What happened was quieter than that and more honest. His voice dropped half a register, and the breath underneath it changed quality, became something unsteady and real, the way a building settles at night, micro-contractions in the frame from the temperature drop. His eyes stayed on the paper, but one blink took longer than the others, and when it opened, the surface of his eye was bright. He finished the toast. He raised the glass. He said her name. And Vivian laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. He would spend considerable time analyzing this later, with the same forensic attention he brought to everything. It was not the laugh of someone who meant to wound. It was the laugh of someone who was surprised, and whose surprise was mildly embarrassed, and who covered that embarrassment with the social tool she reached for most readily, which was lightness, which was the brief musical sound she made when things veered outside her emotional comfort zone. But she was looking at Serena when she made it. And Serena made a face in return, not unkind exactly, but the face of someone who is sharing a private observation, and whatever was communicated between them in that half-second was witnessed by the 7 people seated in their immediate vicinity, including Marcus, including Vivian's mother, including a woman named Patricia, Ethan's aunt from Greenville, who had driven 4 hours that morning and was wearing her best earrings. The laugh lasted perhaps 1.5 seconds. Then Vivian's hand came up and covered her mouth, and she shook her head slightly, a gesture that was meant to communicate something like, "I'm sorry, it's fine, it's endearing." And the room exhaled and someone began to clap. And the moment moved forward the way moments do, metabolized and gone. Ethan sat down. He set his glass on the table. He picked up his fork and moved a piece of endive to the other side of his plate. His pulse was where it always was. His face was where it always was. Marcus, beside him, said nothing. Marcus had known him for 11 years and understood the particular architecture of his silences. He placed one hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, the way you might steady a structure you are not sure has fully settled, and then he removed it and picked up his own glass and took a long drink. The rest of the rehearsal dinner moved at the pace of these events, slightly too long, punctuated by small talk that circled the same conversational landmarks: the venue, the catering, the honeymoon plans, or the spring weather. Ethan participated in all of it. He answered every question directed at him. He made eye contact. He performed the full inventory of social gestures expected of a man who is 2 days from his wedding and should therefore be radiating a specific frequency of contentment. At 10:47, he said his goodbyes. He shook Edmund Hargrove's hand. He kissed Constance on the cheek. He told Serena it had been a lovely evening. He let Vivian walk him to the elevator, her hand in the crook of his arm, and when the door opened, she turned to him in the way she always did at the end of public events, slightly more unguarded, the performance receding, the person underneath it surfacing in increments. "You were wonderful," she said. "The toast was beautiful." He looked at her for a moment. As the hallway was empty except for the two of them, the elevator holding its door, a thin line of warm light from the dining room behind her. "Thank you," he said. She reached up and straightened his collar. It did not need straightening. "You're not upset," she said. It was not quite a question. "About what?" She paused. The pausing itself was its own data point. "I laughed," she said. "During the toast, it was just, you were so—" She searched for the word and settled on genuine. "It surprised me." He held her gaze. The elevator was still waiting. "Good night, Vivian," he said. He stepped in. The door closed. He stood in the elevator and rode it 14 floors down to the lobby, and walked out through the revolving door into the October air, which was cold now, genuinely cold. Just the kind that arrived in the chest before the skin registered it. He walked to the parking structure, 300 meters, unhurried. He found his car on level 2, a gray sedan 5 years old and maintained with meticulous regularity, because that was the kind of thing he maintained. He got in. He started the engine. He sat with both hands on the wheel, and the engine running, and the garage quiet around him, and he did not move for 4 minutes. Then he drove home. His apartment was in a building 12 blocks from the financial district, 23rd floor, northeast corner, with a view of the river and, on clear nights, a thin strip of the opposing bank's lights. He had lived there for 6 years. It was clean in the way that reflected a specific psychology, not sterile but precise. Every object deliberate. Was nothing decorative that had not been chosen with intention. Books on the shelf arranged by subject and then by date of acquisition. Kitchen with 6 items on the counter. Desk in the office with 3 active files and 1 personal notebook, always closed. He made coffee. Not because it was a reasonable hour for coffee, but because the ritual of it, the the specific weight of the grinder, the temperature calibration, the bloom of the grounds when the first pour hit, gave his hand something to do, and his mind the particular low hum of mechanical task that he used, the way other people used bourbon or long drives. He stood at the counter and drank the coffee and looked at the middle distance. The laugh had lasted 1.5 seconds. He had measured longer earthquakes, but he understood. In the way he understood the balance sheets that crossed his desk at Lindqvist and Callaway Financial Forensics, that it was not the duration of a discrepancy that determined its significance. It was what the discrepancy revealed about the underlying structure. A single anomalous line item in a ledger could be nothing. Or it could be the loose thread at the edge of a fabric that, when pulled, unraveled the entire weave. He had spent 22 months building a model of Vivian Hargrove in his mind, the way a forensic accountant builds a model of a company's financial health, pulling data from every available source, looking for patterns, looking for the gap between what was presented and what was true. The model he had built was not perfect, he knew that. No model is, but it had been stable, internally consistent. The laugh had introduced a variable. He finished the coffee. He rinsed the cup. He went to his desk and opened his personal notebook to a clean page, and he wrote one line. He stared at it for a while. Then he closed the notebook and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time, not trying to sleep. His mind moved through information the way it always moved, systematically, without drama, the way a cursor moves through a document scanning for errors. He thought about the morning he had met Vivian at a conference in Chicago, her at the table for the Hargrove Group's foundation arm, him presenting a panel on forensic risk assessment. She had come up afterward with 3 specific questions about his methodology, and the specificity of the questions had impressed him, because most people at those events asked general questions and performative questions, questions that were really just introductions wearing a question's clothes. Hers were real. He thought about the first 8 months, which had been genuinely good in the way some things are genuinely good before you understand their conditions. The trips, the long dinners, the conversations that ran past midnight about architecture and institutional failure, and the particular loneliness of competent people in organizations designed for mediocrity. She was sharp. She was disciplined. She had a physical elegance that was entirely natural, no performance in it, the way some structures are beautiful not because someone designed them to be, but because the engineering solved a problem and beauty was a byproduct. He thought about the shift, which had been gradual, and which he had rationalized at every incremental stage the way people rationalize the early symptoms of a structural fault. It was stress, it was the season, it was the pressure of her family's expectations. It was temporary. He thought about the 5 or 6 moments over the preceding year that he had cataloged as anomalies and then filed away without fully analyzing. He thought about a Tuesday evening in March, 8 months ago, when he had been at his desk until 9 and had come home to find that she had let herself in with the key he had given her and was on the phone in the kitchen, door mostly closed, speaking in a voice 2 registers lower than her normal one, and had rearranged her posture and her tone so thoroughly when she heard him come in that the transition itself was a data point, and he had not filed a report on that data point. He had accepted her explanation, which was that she was speaking to an old friend from boarding school who was going through a difficult divorce and needed discretion. He had accepted it because he had wanted to accept it, and because wanting to accept a thing is, in human beings, a nearly perfect countermeasure to the impulse to investigate it. He had been 22 months into building a life with a woman, and he had wanted it to be true. He understood that impulse now the way you understand a structural flaw in retrospect, completely, and too late to have been useful. The ceiling of his bedroom was the same pale gray it had been when he moved in. He had never repainted it because he never looked at it except in moments like this one, when the whole room reduced to a flat rectangle above him, and he was nothing but a body in a dark, and his mind ran its background processes without interference. He made a decision. Not about the wedding, not yet. He had learned, through years of working with compromised financial data, that the first thing you did when you identified an anomaly was not to act on it. The first thing you did was verify. You documented. You built the evidentiary record before you moved. The man who acts before he has evidence is the man who ends up explaining himself to a room he didn't intend to be in. He would not act. He would look. He closed his eyes. His pulse was where it always was. His breathing was regular. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds, a siren 2 avenues over, the mechanical exhale of an HVAC unit on the building across the alley, the distant percussion of a truck crossing a metal plate on a street somewhere below. He slept. He woke at 5:42, which was 4 minutes before his alarm. He lay still for exactly those 4 minutes, running the prior evening through a filter the way he ran everything through filters, looking for the data beneath the data. Then he rose, dressed, and went to his desk. He did not open the notebook. He opened his laptop. He went to the file he kept on Vivian's family holdings, which he had compiled not with any suspicious intent, but because it was the kind of thing he did, the way a carpenter picks up a board and runs a thumb along the grain before deciding how to cut it. He pulled up the Hargrove Group's most recent SEC filings. He pulled up the trust documents he had reviewed with their estate attorney 6 weeks ago. He pulled up the joint financial disclosures that had been prepared as part of the prenuptial process, a process Vivian had navigated with a breezy confidence that he had read at the time as self-assurance, and was now reading differently. He read for 2 hours. At 7:49, he found it. It was small, a single-line item in a subsidiary investment vehicle, a limited partnership called Ardenvale Capital Partners, which appeared in the trust documents as one of 12 approved investment vehicles for the discretionary portion of Vivian's inheritance trust. He had reviewed these vehicles in the estate attorney's office and had noted them without dwelling on them because 14 vehicles in a trust of this size was not unusual, and because he had been, at the time, looking at the documents as a future husband, and not as a forensic accountant. He was looking at it as a forensic accountant now. Ardenvale Capital Partners had been incorporated 11 months ago in Delaware. A Delaware LLC incorporation was not in itself remarkable. What was remarkable was the secondary filing he found when he cross-referenced the registered agent address, a 30-second search he had run out of habit, which revealed that Ardenvale Capital Partners shared its registered address with 3 other entities, one of which was a holding company called Ashworth Development, LLC. He sat back. Ashworth. He let the word sit in the room with him. Damien Ashworth was not a mystery to Ethan. He was a presence in Vivian's past that she had described when the subject had arisen, with the particular calibrated vagueness that people employ when they want to communicate that something is over without inviting follow-up questions. Old friend. We dated briefly, years ago. Nothing significant. He knew Damien existed the way he knew about dozens of peripheral figures in her social landscape, as a name that appeared occasionally at the edges of contexts, at parties he hadn't attended, in group photographs he'd seen on her phone, in conversation threads he'd caught half of. He had never had reason to look at Damien Ashworth directly. He looked at him now. Ashworth Development LC had been incorporated 14 months ago, 3 months before Ardenvale Capital Partners. Its stated purpose was residential and commercial real estate development. Its managing member was listed as D.M. Ashworth. Ethan pulled up property records. He found 4. 4 properties in the metropolitan area, all acquired in the last 14 months through a sequence of holding entities that, on the surface, had no visible connection to each other or to the Hargrove Trust. But when you knew what you were looking for, when you had 11 years of forensic accounting training and a mind that had been specifically constructed to find the seam where the presentation stopped and the structure beneath it began, you could see the stitching. 2 of the properties had been acquired using financing that traced back, through 2 intermediary entities, to a capital infusion that matched, down to the dollar. Yes, a withdrawal from the discretionary investment account of Vivian Hargrove's trust that had been recorded in the documents as a reallocation to approved vehicle. She had moved money from her family trust into a real estate venture run by Damien Ashworth 11 months ago, and structured it so that the vehicle holding the investment appeared in the trust documents as a routine allocation to an approved entity. The structure was elegant. He gave it that. It was also, depending on the specifics of the trust's morality clause and the terms of the investment, potentially actionable on 3 separate legal fronts. He sat at his desk for a long time. The city was fully awake outside his window, the river catching the early light in flattened silver panels. His coffee had gone cold. He looked at it and decided it was acceptable. Yet he thought about the prenuptial agreement, which they had signed 6 weeks ago. Ethan had negotiated it himself rather than delegating it to the estate attorney, which had struck Vivian's lawyers as unusual, and had struck Vivian herself as evidence of a professional compulsion she found both admirable and slightly cold. What he had not told her, and what the lawyers had not fully registered, was that the specific language he had insisted on in Clause 14 had not come from a standard template. It had come from him. Clause 14 stated, in language he had drafted over 2 evenings with the specific care of a man who was constructing an instrument he might need to use, that any material misrepresentation of financial standing or asset management, specifically including undisclosed fiduciary conflicts of interest in joint or commingled estate planning vehicles, constituted grounds for nullification of the agreement and triggered the forfeiture provisions in Section 8. Section 8 was not punitive in any obvious sense. It simply returned all assets to their premarital state and voided any cross-claims, including claims to Ethan's firm equity, which the Hargrove family attorneys had been quietly angling toward through the asset commingling provisions they had proposed in earlier drafts. He had signed that agreement. So had Vivian. He drank the cold coffee. He was not angry. He examined himself for anger, the way he would have examined a room for damage after a weather event, methodically, without expecting the survey to produce emotion. Yet what he found instead was something cleaner than anger and considerably more useful. It was the particular clarity that arrived when a problem became fully defined, when the shape of it resolved out of ambiguity into something with dimensions and edges and exploitable geometry. He had been trying for 22 months to love a woman. He had done a reasonably good job of it. The attempt had been genuine, whatever else it was, and he was not the kind of man who needed to revise his own past to make his present choices feel logical. He had loved her as well as he knew how, and she had been, in varying measures, a person worth loving. But she had also been doing something else, running a parallel structure, the way a company with clean public filings sometimes runs a parallel set of books for its own internal accounting. and the gap between the two structures had been growing for at least 11 months, which was how long Ardenvale Capital Partners had been operational. He thought about the Tuesday evening in March, the low voice, the rearranged posture. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. Marcus answered on the third ring, sounding like someone who had slept badly and had thoughts about it. "It's 6:53 in the morning, man." "I need 48 hours, Ethan said. Silence. Then, "For what?" "Before the wedding. I need 48 hours to complete a due diligence process." Another silence, longer, the kind that means the person on the other end has woken up very fast. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to do anything, but I'm telling you what I need. The wedding is in 2 days. I know when the wedding is. Your family is already—" "Marcus." His voice did not change. It never changed. "Are you available tomorrow morning?" A pause. Then quietly, "Yeah, I'm available." "Thank you." He hung up. He picked up his notebook, opened it to the line he had written the night before, and read it again. Then he opened it to the next blank page and began to write. He wrote for 40 minutes, the full structure of what he had found, documented in the shorthand he used for active casework, precise and sequential, each data point connected to its source, each inference marked as inference rather than fact. He wrote the way a surgeon prepares an instrument tray before an operation. Everything laid out, everything in the right order, nothing missing. And then he closed the notebook, showered, and went to his office. Lindqvist and Calloway occupied the 9th and 10th floors of a building 2 blocks from the river, glass and limestone, a lobby that smelled of recycled air and the particular cleaning product used on polished concrete floors. Ethan had been a founding partner for 4 years, after 7 years at a larger firm where he had developed a specific reputation for what his colleagues called the quiet method, an approach to forensic investigation that prioritized documentation over confrontation, patience over speed, and the construction of an airtight evidentiary record over the satisfying but frequently counterproductive instinct to confront a subject before you had made your position unassailable. He had applied the quiet method to corporate fraud cases, to estate litigation, and to investment scheme investigations, to 2 government referrals that had resulted in significant regulatory action. He had never applied it to his own life before. There was something almost interesting about that. He went to his private office, closed the door, and called in his most trusted investigative associate, a woman named Dr. Rita Sohn, who held a doctorate in forensic accounting from Columbia and had the particular gift, rare in investigators, of working quickly without ever becoming careless. "I have a personal matter," he told her. "I need a rapid due diligence package. 48 hours. Priority 1. Rita looked at him across the desk, with the expression she used when she was registering information before deciding how to respond. "And a personal as in personally sensitive or personal as in involving you?" "Both." She nodded once, the way she nodded when she was moving from reception to action. "Entities?" He slid a page across the desk. "Start with these 4. Cross-reference to the Hargrove Group's discretionary trust vehicles. I need the full ownership chain on Ardenvale and Ashworth Development. Beneficial ownership, if possible. I need capital flow documentation on anything that moved in the last 14 months. I need it clean, and I need it sourced." She looked at the page. Something in her face acknowledged the significance of the name without commenting on it. She had been at his engagement party 4 months ago. She had met Vivian. "I'll need access to the trust documents," she said. "I have them." "Timeline is tight." "I know." She picked up the page. "You'll have what I can get in 48 hours." That's all I'm asking for." She left. Ethan turned to his computer and opened a second line of inquiry, this one into the property records he had identified that morning, pulling the full title chains, the lender documents, the appraisal records. He was methodical, and he was thorough, and he was, in the way of a man who has spent his entire professional life in rooms with falsified documents, completely free of sentimentality about what he was doing. He ate lunch at his desk. He drank 3 more cups of coffee, the last of which he regretted. At 2 in the afternoon, Vivian texted him about the florist. He replied within 6 minutes with the appropriate response. At 4, she sent a voice note, her voice light and warm, talking about the rehearsal brunch the next morning. Asking whether he preferred the Belgian waffles or the eggs Benedict because apparently the caterer needed to know for the plating setup. He listened to the voice note twice. He replied, "Either is fine." At 6, he went home. He ate something from his refrigerator that he could not subsequently remember. He sat in his office and read through 2 years of publicly available information about Damien Ashworth, who was 37, who had made a first career in commercial real estate acquisitions, who had left a regional development firm 5 years ago under circumstances that the trade press described as a strategic departure, and that a deeper read of the available record suggested was closer to a negotiated exit from a situation involving a disputed land acquisition in the eastern corridor of the metro area. And the disputed land acquisition had been resolved through private arbitration. The terms were sealed. Damien Ashworth had a tan and a very good tailor and a social media presence that communicated exactly the image of a man doing precisely well enough that you didn't need to ask how. Ethan closed the laptop at 10. He went to bed and lay in the dark and ran the problem through its variants the way he ran complex analyses, the same data viewed from different angles, different time horizons, different assumptions. He was not trying to reach a conclusion he hadn't earned yet. He was letting the variables settle into their natural order. He slept at 11:40. He was at his desk by 6 the next morning. Rita came in at 9 with the first tranche of documentation. She sat across from him, her own notebook open, and walked him through it with the efficient, unsentimental delivery of someone presenting audit findings to a board. "The ownership chain on Ardenvale is clean on the surface," she said. "Single member L, LC, D.M. Ashworth, registered agent is a service company in Wilmington. But the beneficial interest disclosure in the Delaware filing is incomplete, which means there's a second investor who took a passive position. I traced the capital infusions." She turned a page. 3 tranches. The first 2 came from a wire transfer originating from a private bank account at a Luxembourg institution that has a corresponding banking relationship with First Atlantic Private, which is the custodian bank for the Hargrove Discretionary Trust. The third tranche is more interesting. Ethan's expression did not change. The third tranche came through a different routing path," Rita continued. "It originated from an entity called Callaway Hargrove Holdings, LLC, which was incorporated in Nevada 4 months ago." He was very still. "I pulled the incorporation documents," she said. She slid a page across the desk. "The registered members are listed as E.A. Callaway and V.C. Hargrove." He looked at the page. His initials. His last name. On an entity he had never heard of, incorporated 4 months ago, 4 months before the wedding, while he had been reviewing prenuptial documents and picking up the pieces of this woman's family's complicated relationship with inheritance tax law. His name had been on a document he had never signed. "The signature on the membership agreement," he said. "We'd need a handwriting expert to confirm," Rita said. But at a visual assessment." She paused. It doesn't look like your signature to me. He looked at the page for a moment longer. Then he set it down. How much went through the entity? He said. $142,000 in 3 transfers spread over 9 weeks. Into Ardenvale? Into Ardenvale, yes. Which means your name is on the beneficial interest structure of a real estate venture being run by a man your fiancé has been. She stopped. She was Rita Sohn. She did not speculate beyond the data. A man with a prior business history involving disputed asset transactions. Ethan nodded. There's more, she said. Tell me. The Hargrove Family Trust has a provision I flagged when I reviewed the document. Section 11, subsection C, the morality clause. She found the page. It states that any trustee who engages in conduct constituting financial fraud, specifically including the creation or use of instruments bearing forged or unauthorized signatures for the purpose of investment activity, forfeits the discretionary distribution rights under the trust immediately and permanently. I know the provision, he said. The trustee is Vivienne. I know who the trustee is. Rita looked at him for a moment. The trust executor is a firm called Henley & Cross. The senior executor is a man named Walter Henley, who is in his late 60s and has been managing the Hargrove family interests for 23 years. He's old school. He's exactly the kind of man who would take a formal presentation of this evidence very seriously. Ethan looked out the window. The river was the color of iron today, flat and cold, nay, a barge moving through it at the pace of deliberate things. Who else has seen this? He said. Just me. Keep it that way. Of course. She closed her notebook. Then, because she was Rita, and not nothing, she said, What do you want to do with it? He was quiet for a moment. I want to complete the record, he said. I want every transaction documented, sourced, and dated. I want the signature analysis commissioned through forensic document examiners on 42nd. I want the full capital flow mapped. I want a timeline that a 10-year-old could follow. And then? Then I want it ready. She nodded and stood. Rita, he said. She paused. The wedding is tomorrow. She held his gaze. I understand. She left. He turned back to the window. The barge had moved almost out of sight. He watched it until it was gone, and then turned to his desk and opened a fresh file. He worked until 4 in the afternoon. He took one call from Vivian about the morning ceremony logistics, and he answered it with the same calibrated warmth he had been deploying for 22 months, present and attentive, and betraying nothing. She sounded excited, he thought. Genuinely excited, the way a person is excited the night before a thing they have planned very carefully and are confident in. The way a director is excited the night before opening night. He wondered, not for the first time, what the inside of her calculation looked like. Whether she had one. Whether this was the considered architecture of a woman who had decided that love and financial strategy could occupy the same space without one contaminating the other, or whether it was something messier and more human, as something that had started as a relationship and accumulated the other elements the way a river accumulates sediment, without intention, just the movement of time and opportunity. He decided he didn't need to know. The inside of her calculation was not relevant to the outside of what she had done. He left the office at 4:15. He walked home. The air was cold in the same way it had been the night before, autumn establishing itself with the commitment of a new management team. Nothing tentative about it. He stopped at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his building. It was a small place, the kind that had been there for 15 years before the neighborhood changed around it, and was now slightly out of register with its surroundings. A little dim, the counter scarred from years of use. As a sign on the chalkboard advertising a soup of the day in handwriting that had been there long enough to fade slightly at the edges. He ordered a drip coffee, black, in a paper cup with a cheap plastic lid that didn't quite seal right. He paid with cash. He sat at the counter and drank the coffee and did not think about anything in particular for 12 minutes. It was the best 12 minutes of the week. Then he went home. He did not call the wedding off that night. He had been asked, later, why not? And the honest answer was that he was not ready. Not because he was uncertain about what he had found or what it meant, but because he understood, with the precision of someone who had spent his career studying the difference between a premature action and a strategic one, and that the timing of a move determines its effect as much as the move itself does. He needed the record to be complete. He needed the signatures analyzed. He needed the capital flows documented to the last wire transfer. He needed the file to be the kind of file you could hand to a regulatory body, a trust executor, and an attorney in the same afternoon without having to explain or justify or supplement anything. He needed it to be bulletproof before he touched it. He called his Aunt Patricia and told her the wedding was postponed due to a scheduling issue with the venue, which was not true, but which was the kind of statement that would give her the least distress while he completed what he was doing. He asked her not to share this with anyone else until he contacted her again. She was, bless her, a woman of considerable discretion, and she said she understood. He called Marcus. "I need 3 months," he said. A very long silence. Then, 3 months. "The wedding is being postponed. I have a reason. I can't share it yet. I need 3 months to complete what I'm working on." "Ethan," Marcus said, "talk to me." "I'm talking to you. I'm telling you it's under control. I need 3 months." Another silence. "Is she safe? Is this a safety thing?" "No, it's a documentation thing." A pause. He could hear Marcus deciding. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "I'm going to call you more often than you're accustomed to," Ethan said. "That would be approximately twice a year's worth of normal, so brace yourself." "I know." He called Vivian last. She answered on the second ring, tone on her voice carrying the bright anticipation of someone who has been waiting for this call and has been managing the waiting with cosmetic patience. "I've been thinking about tomorrow," she said immediately. "So have I," he said. "I need to talk to you about the ceremony." A pause. Small, but real. "What about it?" "There's a scheduling conflict that came up with the venue," he said. "Nothing dramatic. The space we had reserved for the reception has a prior booking that wasn't cleared from the calendar. It came through this afternoon. We need to move the date." Silence. "Ethan," she said slowly, "I know it's late notice. I'm sorry. I've already spoken to the coordinator, and there are 3 open dates in January that work with both families' schedules." The silence was longer this time. He could hear her processing. But could hear the machinery of her composure engaging the way it always did when she was managing an unexpected variable. "That's—" a breath. "That's very late notice." "It is, I'm sorry." "Did you speak to—" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Another silence, this one with a different texture. He could hear her deciding what to believe. She was not, he had always known, a stupid woman. She was a sharp woman who had made sharp decisions, and one of those decisions had been to believe, perhaps, that he was a level below her in the particular skill set of strategic self-protection. "January," she said finally. "January." A very controlled exhale. "All right," she said. "I'll call Serena tonight. We'll manage it." "Thank you." "Are you—" she paused. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said. Because you've been— since the rehearsal." "I'm fine," he said. "I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up. He stood in the kitchen, the cold coffee in his hand, the river outside throwing back the last of the evening light in diminishing silver. He felt in the way of a man who has made an irreversible decision and knows it, a kind of clean and absolute stillness. Not peace, exactly. More like the stillness that follows the click of a well-made lock. He put the coffee down and went to work. The 3 months that followed were the most productive of his professional life. This was not an accident. Ethan had known for years that his best work arrived under the precise conditions of personal stakes, not because stress improved his cognition, but because personal investment eliminated the small inefficiencies of professional detachment. When you cared about the outcome, you found the 10th data point that the person who didn't care would have stopped at 9. He cared about this. Rita had the complete evidentiary package assembled within 14 days. The signature analysis came back within 3 weeks, a formal written opinion from a certified forensic document examiner at a firm with 18 years of court-accepted testimony, concluding with a stated degree of professional certainty that the signature on the Callaway-Hargrove Holdings membership agreement bore characteristics inconsistent with the known signature samples of E.A. Callaway, and was more consistent with an attempt to replicate that signature than with its authentic production. He read the opinion twice. He filed it. He also, during those 3 months, did several other things. He contacted a securities attorney, a careful and unsentimental woman named Helen Chow at a firm that operated at the quieter end of the regulatory landscape, and he presented her with the complete capital flow documentation. Helen reviewed it over the course of a week and came back to him with a precise assessment, the structure of the investment, specifically the use of an entity bearing his name to route capital into a securities-adjacent vehicle without his knowledge or consent, constituted potential wire fraud and securities fraud, and the forged signature element added a federal dimension to the exposure. She could file a formal referral to the SEC's Examination Division. The referral would trigger a preliminary inquiry. The preliminary inquiry would, in cases of this type, and with documentation of this quality, typically escalate to a formal investigation within 60 to 90 days. He said, "File it." He contacted Walter Henley. This required the most care of any step he had taken. Walter Henley was not a man you approached informally or incautiously. He was 71, a trust and estate practitioner of the old tradition, a man whose office still had bookshelves of actual law volumes arranged by year of publication, and who had a handshake like a door closing. He had managed Hargrove family assets since before Vivian was born. He was, in the language of trust law, a fiduciary of the highest obligation. Ethan sent him a letter, not an email. A letter typed on Lindqvist and Callaway letterhead, addressed to him personally, delivered by courier. The letter stated formally and precisely, first that he was a party to the Hargrove family trust through the contemplated marriage, and that in the course of reviewing joint financial documentation, he had identified a series of transactions involving the discretionary investment vehicle that appeared to bear on the conditions set forth in Section 11, subsection C of the trust instrument. He attached a summary of the documentation. He invited Mr. Henley to contact him at his convenience. Walter Henley called him within 48 hours. They met in Henley's office, which was exactly what Ethan had expected it to be. Large, wood-paneled, slightly formal, smelling of old paper and lemon polish, the kind of office that communicated that the work done within it had weight. Walter Henley shook his hand, and they sat, and Henley looked at the documentation package Ethan placed on his desk and read through it without speaking for 22 minutes, while Ethan sat across from him and looked at a framed topographic map of Vermont on the wall, and waited. When Henley looked up, his expression was the expression of a man who has seen many things in his professional life, and who has learned not to show what he thinks of them in his face until he is certain of his ground. "You understand," Henley said, "that if the evidence in this package is as represented, the implications for the trust are significant." "I understand that," Ethan said. "The trust has a mandatory notification requirement." Henley set down the page he was holding. "If evidence of a qualifying breach comes to my attention, I am obligated to act on it. I don't have discretion in the matter." "I understand that too," Ethan said. Henley looked at him carefully. "You came to me rather than to the family directly." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you are the appropriate party," Ethan said. "The trust obligation runs to the beneficiaries as a class. You represent that obligation. Acting through you is the correct path." Henley held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly, in the manner of a man who respects a correct answer and is not going to inflate his respect with additional commentary. "I'll need to engage independent counsel," Henley said, "and I'll need to complete my own verification process before I take formal action." "Of course, that will take some time." "I have time," Ethan said. He did not rush. He had never rushed anything in his life that mattered. And he understood that the error most people make in high-stakes situations is converting urgency into speed, which are not the same thing. Urgency is the correct assessment of what is at stake. Speed is the act of moving faster than your accuracy can support. One is a virtue. The other is a liability. He was in no hurry. He had 3 months. During those 3 months, he also had dinner with Vivian 6 times. He attended one of her family's charity events, standing next to her in a room full of people who did not know what was happening and behaving with complete social competence. He answered her texts. He spoke to her on the phone. He maintained, with the full technical capacity of a man who had been performing composed normality since childhood, the appearance of a postponed wedding that was simply waiting on a new date. She seemed, during those months, almost relieved. He had observed this and found it informative. The postponement had, perhaps, removed a pressure she had been managing, the approach of a deadline that had its own complications. She was warmer to him than she had been in the preceding months. More attentive. She sent him things, articles she'd read, a photograph of a restaurant she thought they should try, a voice note one. Thursday morning that was just her drinking coffee and talking about a dream she'd had. The kind of ordinary intimacy she had performed very well in the early months and then gradually reduced as the calculation of the relationship had shifted in her mind. He accepted these gestures. He reciprocated them at the appropriate frequency. He was, during those 3 months, possibly the best version of himself he had ever presented to her, attentive and warm and present in the way she had always wanted him to be, because he had nothing left to protect and nothing left to perform, and the removal of those 2 weights had made him, paradoxically, easier to be. He did not do it to be cruel. He was not cruel. He was simply himself, running the process he had decided to run, completing the record, waiting for the conditions to be correct. At 63 days into the 3 months, Walter Henley called him. My verification is complete, Henley said. The documentation holds. I assumed it would, Ethan said. I'm required to take action within 10 business days. I understand. I want to be precise with you, Henley said. The action I'm required to take is a formal notification of the beneficiary and the initiation of trust review proceedings. The outcome of those proceedings is not certain, but given the evidence, the most probable outcome is a suspension of discretionary distributions pending the resolution of the investigation. I understand, Ethan said again. A pause. The family will be notified, Henley said. Edmund Hargrove will know. Constance will know. Yes, Ethan said. This will be... Henley seemed to search briefly for his word, and then decided against whatever he had been reaching for. It will have significant consequences for a number of people. Actions typically do, Ethan said. Another pause, the kind that contained a question Henley was too professional to ask. Is there anything else you need from me? Ethan said. No, Henley said. Thank you for bringing this to the appropriate party. Of course. He hung up. 3 days later, the SEC Examination Division sent Ashworth Development LLC a notice of preliminary inquiry, which was not a public document, but which, in the small and interconnected world of metropolitan real estate development, created exactly the kind of information leak that preliminary inquiries typically create when they land in the inbox of a managing member who is also in a financially leveraged position. By the end of that week, 2 of Damien Ashworth's institutional investors had quietly initiated their own review processes. By the following week, the Hargrove family's attorney had been in contact with Henley's office 4 times. Ethan knew all of this because he had built the kind of information network that the quiet method requires, not surveillance, not anything improper, simply the careful cultivation of professional contacts in relevant fields, the attorney who happened to be friendly with one of Henley's colleagues, the commercial real estate broker who tracked investment vehicle activity in the metro area as a standard part of her market analysis, the financial journalist who had covered Ashworth Development's earlier acquisition controversy, and who received, from a professional source who requested discretion, a quiet tip that the story had a second chapter. He was, in his profession, very good at this. He had simply applied it to a different domain. The journalist's story ran on a Wednesday. It was not a front-page story. It ran in the business section of a publication with serious regional reach, under a headline that was precise and measured and did not sensationalize. It reported the SEC preliminary inquiry, the capital flow anomalies that investigators were examining, and the involvement of a trust vehicle associated with the Hargrove Group. It named Damien Ashworth. It did not name Vivian. It did not need to. In the world she inhabited, the architecture of implication was sufficient. The story named the trust vehicle. Anyone with knowledge of the Hargrove trust structure, which included everyone in the Hargrove family's extended financial and social circle, could construct the rest of the sentence themselves. Ethan read the story over breakfast on the Wednesday it ran. He ate toast with butter and drank his coffee, and read it the way he read everything, once for comprehension, and once for what was between the lines. And then he set his phone face down on the table and finished his breakfast. At 8:47, his phone rang. It was Vivian. He let it ring 3 times, which was his normal behavior, a practical artifact of the fact that he typically had something in his hands when calls came in and needed a moment to set it down. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Good morning," he said. Her voice was different. Not the warm voice, not the public voice, not the voice she used with him in the calibrated intimacy of their phone calls. It was the voice underneath those voices, the one he had heard very rarely, and the one that arrived when her composure had been genuinely tested rather than aesthetically deployed. It was lower and more direct, and in it was a kind of urgency that was entirely real. "Have you seen the piece in the Clarion?" she said. "I've seen it," he said. "Ethan." A breath. There's something happening with the trust, and I need to. My father has been calling, and there's apparently. She stopped. He could hear her organizing herself, pulling the edges of her control back to the center. "I need to see you." "All right," he said. "Tonight. Can I come to yours?" "I'll be home at 7, he said. She was there at 6:53, and he buzzed her up. He heard the elevator, heard her footsteps in the hallway, the particular rhythm of her walk, and opened the door before she knocked. And she was in the coat she'd bought in Milan 2 years ago, dark gray wool, a coat he had seen her wear 100 times, and she was carrying her bag in the crook of her arm. And she looked at him when he opened the door with an expression that was genuinely unguarded in a way he had not seen from her in a long time. "Come in," he said. She came in. She set her bag on the hall table. She did not take off the coat immediately, which meant she was not yet certain of the ground she was standing on. He went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water from the filter pitcher because he had nothing else open and had not anticipated offering alcohol for this conversation. He brought them to the living room and set them on the table and sat in the armchair rather than the sofa. She stood for a moment, then sat on the sofa, straight, on hands in her lap. "The trust is being reviewed," she said. "Walter Henley sent formal notice today. He says there are—" She stopped. "He says there are irregularities in the discretionary vehicle documentation." Ethan looked at her. "Damien's company is under investigation," she said, and now her voice had dropped further into something that was almost quiet. "The Clarion piece, the timing of it." She looked at him. "Did you know about this?" He held her gaze for a moment. "Tell me what you think happened," he said. She was very still. Then, "Ethan." "I'm not being coy," he said. "I want to understand what you believe occurred." She looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment he watched something shift in her face, a slow settling of possibility into probability. And the way a building settles when the foundation finally confirms what the walls have been suggesting. "You found it," she said. "The trust documents." He didn't answer. "The prenuptial review," she said slowly. "You went through everything. You found the entity." He was quiet. "The signature," she said, and her voice was very low now. He looked at the water glass on the table between them. "I never used your money," she said. "I want you to know that. The capital was from the trust. It was my money. It was commingled under my name," he said. "I know." She pressed her lips together. "I know that. I should have—" She stopped. "I was going to tell you. After the wedding, once things were established, I was going to—" "You were going to tell me after the wedding," he said. What the flatness of his voice in the room was a different kind of thing than silence. Silence is simply the absence of sound. His voice in those moments was the presence of something that had decided not to be anything other than what it was. She looked at him with an expression that was the most real thing he had seen from her in 22 months, stripped of the warmth and the management and the calculated presentation. And what was underneath those things was a woman who understood now precisely what she had done and what it had cost and what it was going to cost. "I was stupid," she said. He did not answer. Damien was... It was old. It was something that... She stopped again. "It wasn't what I wanted. It was something I was trying to end, and it became complicated, and I made decisions I shouldn't have. He looked at the window. The river was dark outside, the bridge lights reflecting on the surface in broken lines. "Ethan," she said, "talk to me." "I'm listening," he said. "Don't do that." Her voice had an edge in it, the first real edge he had heard from her that evening. Don't sit there and look at the window and be—" She stopped. She pressed her hand to the side of her face briefly, a gesture he had never seen her make. "I'm asking you to talk to me." He looked at her. "I made mistakes," she said. "Significant ones. I know that. I'm not here to defend what I did. I'm here because She looked at her hands. "I don't want to lose you." The sentence sat in the room. He looked at her for a moment, then he reached forward and picked up his water glass and took a long drink. "The trust review will take approximately 6 to 8 weeks, he said. And the SEC preliminary inquiry may resolve more quickly, depending on whether they find additional actionable material beyond what's in the initial referral. The morality clause in the trust instrument is, in my assessment and based on consultation with a trust attorney whose opinion I sought independently, likely to be triggered by what Henley's review finds, which means the discretionary distribution rights, the portion of the trust your annual operating expenses have been running through for the last 4 years, will be suspended for the duration." She was very still. "The Callaway Hargrove Holdings entity will be dissolved," he said. "I've already begun the process through Nevada Corporate Counsel. My name will be removed. The capital that moved through it will be the subject of the SEC inquiry, which I cannot influence and would not try to." He set the glass down. "The prenuptial agreement," he said, "which you signed, contains language in Clause 14 that applies to the situation as documented. The agreement is void. Not voidable. Void. I have a letter from the estate attorney to that effect." She was looking at him in a way that was entirely still, the way something very fast moving becomes still when it has exhausted its momentum. "The wedding," he said, "is not being rescheduled." In the silence that followed this, the apartment made its small domestic sounds. The refrigerator cycling. A cab somewhere below the window. The building's infrastructure, its pipes and ducts and circuitry, running the work of keeping the space habitable. Vivian looked at him for a long time. "Ethan," she said, and in the word was something that was not strategy and was not performance, and was, as far as he could assess it, completely real. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Please." He looked at her. "Don't do this," she said. "I know what I did. I know how bad it looks, and I know why I know this is what I deserve, and I'm not." Her voice broke slightly on the word deserve, and she stopped and gathered herself with visible effort. "But I'm asking you not to do this. I'm asking you to give me the chance to—" "I sat at a table," he said, "in front of 60 people, and I read 11 sentences about you. The 11th sentence was about the way you called me from a parking garage at 11 at night because you'd seen something funny and needed to tell someone immediately, and you dialed me without thinking." He paused. I wrote that sentence because it was the truest thing I knew about what it felt like to be chosen by you." She said nothing. "You laughed," he said. "Not loud, not angry, just the facts of the matter, placed on the table the way you place a document, precisely and without flourish, and let it be what it is." She closed her eyes. He stood up. He walked to the hall and opened the door. He stood beside it, not blocking it, not gesturing, simply making it available. She sat on his sofa for another moment, her hands in her lap, her coat still on, her composure assembled and reassembled, and now assembled into something that was no longer performance, and was simply the face of a person sitting with what they had done. Then she stood. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped in front of him, very close. The same distance as the elevator at the Ashwick Grand 3 months ago. He held the door. She looked at his face for a moment, searching it the way you search something you are seeing for the last time, making a record of it. Then she walked out. He closed the door. He stood in the hallway of his apartment for a moment, his hand on the door, the wood solid and cool under his palm. The sounds of the building, the city below. The river outside the window, moving in the dark in its ancient and indifferent direction, carrying everything downstream whether it wanted to go or not. He went to his desk. He opened his notebook to the page where, 3 months ago, he had written one line after the rehearsal dinner. He read it. The line said, "Find out what is true." He picked up a pen. Below the line, he wrote one more word. Done. Good. He closed the notebook. He went to the kitchen, poured the remaining water from both glasses down the drain, rinsed them, and set them on the rack. He turned off the light over the sink. He turned off the lamp in the living room. He stood in the half-dark with the city light coming through the window and thought about his Aunt Patricia's earrings and the cold in the parking structure and the specific weight of a gardenia's smell in a sealed room. Then he went to his desk and opened a new client file. He had work to do.